are you? This is Paula Connor with Elevate Me Hub, and I'm very excited to share that I have a special guest with me today, Mr. Paul Beatty, who is a biochemist. And we're going to be talking today about the importance of the breath, getting oxygen into the cells, and the chemistry of fear and what that does to the body. But before we get to Paul, I want to play a short little clip from The Nature of Things with Dr. David Suzuki, where Paul was a guest 30 years ago, and then we're going to get into a little bit of his history shortly. So let's take a listen real quick.
Imagine being bedridden for months, even years, with a condition no one can explain. Having an illness for which there is no treatment or cure, and then being dismissed as crazy. The people we're about to meet have been living this nightmare. Too ill to work or go to school, many have become isolated, depressed, even suicidal. Patients are left confused and frustrated. Many turn to alternative medicine. Some fall prey to so-called miracle cures. However, one holistic remedy has shown promise. In 1989, Paul Beatty of Oakville, Ontario, lost his health, his job, and his life savings when he came down with CFS. Last year, Paul began taking an essential fatty acid called evening primrose oil.
I heard in 1990 about a preliminary study that had been done in Glasgow by Dr. Dhea. I decided to try it on my own. And within 30 days, I started to feel much better. And by 90 days, I was 60, 75, 80% improved.
Dr. Behan's clinical trial indicated that 85% of those tested improved on the supplement. He believes the treatment may correct a cellular deficiency in patients.
We know that one of the abnormalities that is associated with this disturbed cellular function is a lowering of essential fatty acids. You find, for example, following glandular fever or following other virus infections, that essential fatty acids become very low. The precise defect in the energy role is not known, but it appears that it's linked up with essential fatty acids. Therefore, by giving a very high level, you would expect to get some improvement, as you do, but not a cure.
Hi, Paul. How are you doing today?
Great. Yourself, Paula?
I'm very happy. It's a beautiful sunny day here in Ontario. It's nice to see the blue sky.
Absolutely.
Paul Beatty, a little bit about Paul, his background: he has a Bachelor's of Arts in Sciences, a Bachelor in Physical Health and Education, as well as an MBA in Business. And maybe, Paul, really briefly, can you share the 30 years that you have been researching biochemistry with your two mentors, briefly for the audience?
Yes, I didn't plan to get into this scientific area. I was a businessman with working for a Fortune 500 company. And in 1989, I was stricken by a viral infection, with, first of all, being diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. And then after a few teeth fell out and hair started falling out and half covered in bleeding eczema and bedridden, and I guess 15 or 20 doctors. Then what happened was I was diagnosed with myalgic encephalomyelitis, chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, malignant hypothermia, all that good stuff, and went through all of the answers of trying to find ways out of this and so forth, and subsequently was introduced to a clinical trial that was published in Acta Neurological Scandinavia in 1990, I believe it was, by a Harvard-trained neurologist, head of Royal Glasgow Hospital, with long-chain fatty acids for post-viral syndromes. And of course, this didn't get much press because it was written in Dutch. And the mentor there that I hooked up with then was a Dr. David Horobin and his sidekick, Dr. Mehar Manku. And Horobin unfortunately passed in the early 2000s. Dr. Manku is in charge of the medical hypothesis, but Horobin basically was the founder of medical in taking lipids and the biochemistry of lipids into the realm of clinical medicine. So he's the father of clinical medicine with essential fatty acids, and he introduced the world in the 80s he has about 800 publications, 110 patents, and was notarized for all his work, evening primrose oil and fish oil, omega-6 and 3 back then. And move forward, and as the research pours out, I've hooked up with a number of scientists around the world and just try to reach out and help other people so they don't go through what I went through.
Okay, so basically what you're saying is that you spent a lot of time doing research on essential fatty acids, which is, like you say, is the ethanol primrose oil. And did that research, obviously that is what helped you go back to homeostasis or healed all of those ailments that you just shared. And is that because essential fatty acids, or essentially the ethanol primrose oil, helps to get the oxygen into the cell? Is that accurate?
Absolutely. And what the stunning thing about this research that isn't being used today is the clinical trials with, I believe it was 61 people in it with chronic Epstein-Barr, which can initiate these syndromes as well as many other viruses. 85% of the people could go back to work in 3 months that were bedridden. And that got no play in the United States or North America, basically, because it was all written in Dutch. And it was a double-blind crossover trial, which is the gold standard. And nobody's done any work since. And the long-chain fats, when they're there from nature in what they call the cis form, then these long-chain fats suck oxygen like a magnet across 7 membranes into the mitochondria for energy. So they're like the carburetor that opens up on your car, and now you could start to burn fuel again. And when they're adulterated from heating and processing and exposure to oxygen, that cis shape collapses into like a bobby pin, and they actually block oxygen. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that sure does. So for those that are listening that have any concerns with respect to colds and viruses and flus, and when the body is struggling to defend itself in support of the immune system and in support of getting the oxygen into the cells through the double layer of the cell membrane. It has a double layer, right, through the mitochondria.
Double lipid layer, yes.
And then what you also had shared with me before when we were talking is it's somehow, what is it that impairs the delta 6 enzyme that restricts the ability of oxygen to get into the cell?
Well, the delta 6 enzymes are just catalysts. So they take a molecule that you require from your diet. And of course, there's 2. These are called essential fatty acids. And it's on the omega-6 chain, it's linoleic acid. And on the omega-3 chain, it's alpha-linolenic. And these are basically recognized as your 2 essential fatty acids. You can't make them. You must get them from your diet. And then these enzymes convert them into long-chain fats of different carbon atom lengths. These then incorporate into the membrane. And if you think of it like a house, 50% approximately of your house is bricks and mortar, say. Well, that's saturated fat. You know, the thing they told you not to eat? That's your, whether it's grass-fed butter or it's animal lard, like our grandparents all ate, coconut oil. These are saturated fats. They're solid at room temperature. They are the solid foundation of the outside walls of your house. These long-chain fats that you have to make now through this delta 6 enzyme, they are the windows and doors, and they must fit properly, or you have leaky cells and you have a transport system that's impaired, because when they open and close, they are supposed to let certain molecules into the cell, the unit of life, and they are supposed to let certain toxic out of the cell. So you can see the windows and doors are absolutely critical that they be the proper structure. And they're the proper structure from nature in this cis form. And they do not fit very well as doors and windows when we process them, as is available, all these different fats in so much processed food that people are not being warned about.
Right, because that processed food is basically dirty. It's dirty food, right? It adds a lot of chemicals and toxins and unnecessary, unnatural things that the body does not require in order to maintain optimal health. Okay, so essentially eating essential fatty acids, the FML, and then I'll get the two, I'll put the two images up for the audience to be able to
Yeah,
help.
and I don't want to push any brands or anything else, but you have to be very careful when you're buying these things, because a lot is coming from China like everything else. And of course, it's cut with different oils to meet their specifications. You know, we can't even buy 50% plus of the olive oil out there, which is not an essential fat, it's an oleic acid. But even that, it's all being cut with canola oil and these other altered oils. So, and we've just heard on the news this week that they're putting palm oil in butter.
Yeah, that's
So you have to be very careful. And the only reason I recommend FML, other than the fact I have a loyalty to Horobin, the only reason is that it's the only one that's been through clinical trials and toxicology. It's grown only in New Zealand and the Netherlands on organic soil, and very few people or companies or farmers out there will grow evening primrose because it only blooms at night every 2 years, and it takes 10,000 seeds to make one capsule. So FML is the only one actually approved by Health Canada in 2008 for acne and for what else? With acne, psoriasis, eczema, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I've done Primrose Oil on and off all my life, but more recently, every single day, and I've noticed a big difference. And I eat pretty clean anyway. Okay, so thank you so much for that background. That is one very simple solution people can add to help get that oxygen into their cells, to help optimize the immune system function, the body system function, because we are made up of 50 trillion cells, right? So if we can get the oxygen into the cells, we're getting a long way there. So I want to pivot here.
If I could interject for a minute, and
Yes,
it's
please.
important that people know, we don't need a lot of this. I mean, if you take, like I do 30 years later, if you take a maintenance dose of, say, a couple capsules, 2 or 3 a day, which would equate, if you broke open the capsules, to like a quarter of a teaspoon. What people need to understand is that if you had 2 pieces of Kentucky Fried Chicken and some French fries, you could squeeze 5 times the oil out of it. That's bad. So the message here is, these fatty acids, when they're right, and you do it in balance between the two, the omega-6 and 3, you don't need a ton of them. It's the balance that's critical. They need to be biologically active, of course. But the number one thing people can do is stop blocking all the windows and doors with that adulterated oil from processed food.
Yeah, clean up every diet, basically, right?
Yeah, because too many
we all like
people want a quick
cheeseburger
fix.
now and again, right? We all like something that tastes yummy. The point is, what are you doing 80% of the time? If you're pretty clean 80% of the time and you allow yourself a little treat, if that's your passion or your love of food, just allow it now and again rather than it being an everyday kind of occurrence, right? Because you said that's the optimal word here is balance.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, thank you for adding that. So let's pivot here. I want to talk about getting into the chemistry of fear now. So can you please tell us, so we do know that when we have stress, we get a shot of the stress hormone, which is cortisol. The adrenals are fired up. we get a shot of cortisol. And when we are under stress, the immune system shuts down so that it can send that energy to deal with the stress event. Can you tell us a little bit what happens at the cellular level when we're looking at the chemistry of fear or stress, anger, any of those, you could say, lower vibe or lower emotions deplete us? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, and this is critical to understand, especially in today's times. A little bit of being under stress is a motivating force. And of course, this comes from our history of, my God, there's a lion around the corner. I'm going to have to get the heck out of here in a hurry. So everything shuts down. The blood flows away from everywhere but to the legs so that you can run like Usain Bolt away from the lion. But long-term stress on a constant basis, what it does biologically and chemically is when your body's pouring out cortisol, epinephrine, non-epinephrine, okay, all the from the adrenals, what these things do is they inhibit the delta-6 enzyme. And other things that inhibit this delta-6 enzyme, of course, are toxins like alcohol, chemotherapy, radiation. Other things that inhibit this enzyme are persistent viral infections. It gets weaker as we age. It's impaired in diabetics, so the insulin response. It's impaired by cancer. So there's a whole host of things, toxic chemicals and so forth. So that catalyst, the delta-6 enzyme and the others, delta-5-4, these things are inhibited by all these factors. And long-term stress, to go back to say the car, is like very gradually starting to close the carburetor, and how are you going to run and have any energy when there's no oxygen mixing with the gas? So it shuts down the ability to transfer the oxygen from your bloodstream into your mitochondria across the membranes. And this is very, very easily shown by how come a person with, say, large injuries can go into a hyperbaric chamber, and those large injuries, large muscles, whatever, they recover quickly. That's because of the oxygen. But small things like diabetic ulcers and venous ulcers and foot ulcers and things, they're not touched by the hyperbaric chamber. They won't help them. But you put them on these fats and those heal. Why? These fats produce substances then. These are called eicosanoids, and I know it sounds complicated, but we make these every breath we take. Up to 2,000 per second per cell to communicate with the other cells. And they're all these fatty acid derived. And what these things do, the first key one is the bronchial and peripheral vasodilator and major anti-inflammatory. It opens up the pathway and says, come on in, oxygen. If we're not making that because it's shut down by stress, then this is why people under long-term stress are just so fatigued. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that does. And obviously, when we are under a constant state of stress because of these stress hormones, and thank you for explaining what happens at the cellular level, the result of cortisol, that inhibits everything in the body, right? It depletes the immune, or it shuts down the immune system, shuts down the ability for oxygen to get into the cells, and essentially everything is prepared to fight the tiger. As the lovely Bruce Lipton says, if you beat the tiger, if you can get away from the tiger, the stress is over. But that is not the case in our current world, because if we just look at the current state of our world, we are clearly in great change. Everything is changing. Everything is up in the air. Nothing is like we thought it would ever be. So every single person on this planet right now is under a level of stress that they've never had before. So now, how do we combat that? So we've talked about a supplement that can assist over the counter. We've talked about the importance of nutrition, because people do need to remember food is medicine, and that the human body is so intelligent that it has its own pharmacopoeia. It knows exactly what to do because life wants to survive. Life loves life. So can we talk for a second about DHEA, which is what is released in the body when we are in a state of joy or gratitude or laughter, or in nature when things are, we're recognizing beauty, care, compassion. Any of those emotions help the body create what I think I've heard you refer to it as the vitalizing hormone. Can you talk to us a little bit about DHEA and what that does at the cell level?
Well, first of all, we need to distinguish between, all of these are so-called localized. Some are localized, some are systemic hormones. When you look at systemic kind of hormones, you're looking at testosterone, you're looking at progesterone, you're looking at estrogen, you're looking at things like DHEA and so forth. These other ones at the cell level are like that, like they're local, but they're localized. They only act locally to communicate amongst cells at the local level, and these are called icosanoids, and there's 4 big families. I hate to bother you with the words, but there's leukotrienes, thromboxans, lymphoxins, and then you get into all the leukotrienes and all the stuff that the biochemists and the scientists at the drug companies are trying to block and so forth. The point is, all of these things are derived from fats, but they're only derived from the fats from nature, the good fats. And a good example of this is, because it's been in the news for the last 10, 15 years, everybody gobbling all these omega-3 fish oils, concentrated fish oils. Well, if you caught a fish on the side of the river and you brought it to the shore and you gutted it and you built a little fire and you had it right there fresh, it's very healthy for you. Of course, the molecules that are so helpful in this are your EPA and DHA from your omega-3 chain that you hear about. But would you eat that fish if it sat on the dock for 6 hours in the sunlight? Probably not, because it's now rancid and smells. That's those fats turning bad. So the key thing with making these proper hormones is that we have to realize that the enemy is processed food in making these things. When I lecture to doctors, and I have a big group of doctors to speak to as well as naturopaths next week, and they don't understand most of this chemistry, it really comes down to one simple thing. At the end of the day, don't eat anything that doesn't go bad in 4 days on your counter. Why? Because it's the fatty acids, even trace amounts in those berries and those vegetables. That's what oxidizes and turns bad. So the key is on all of these hormones to try and find balance. And what's particularly interesting with the stress hormones, because I've seen this many, many times over the years, is that when a person is under a lot of stress and it impairs this delta-6, if you take more gamma-linolenic acid, that is what the delta-6 would be making from linoleic acid. And the largest amount of this is found in the breast milk of a mother, but this is your active ingredient in evening primrose and a few other things like spirulina. There's some in hemp oil. But that GLA then converts rapidly to something called, sorry for the big word, it's good for Scrabble, dehomogamma-linolenic acid. And then you start producing this prostaglandin 1, which opens the carburetor. So you can actually move up and down with this food supplement. And I'm actually involved right now in having this rolled out in the US with podiatrists for wound healing, because we have FDA approval for a formulation that we have a patent on to basically through the podiatrist for wound healing. Because believe it or not, with the FDA, the only thing on the books are bandages and money.
All right. Okay, so thank you for a lot of big words there, and yeah,
well, sorry about that, but
okay, that's okay. Like I say, Arcamp, this is just to remind people how much of a miracle we are. The body is such incredible
People have no
complex.
idea, Bruce Lipton does, but people have no idea, but these molecules, just at the local level, these molecules, we make them with every breath and they disappear with every breath. That's why you can't see any of this making its way into big pharma, because you'd have to inject somebody 40 times a day with a needle. Do you follow me? So what happens is we make up to 2,000 of these per second, per cell. And the theory is our brains are making up to 10,000 of these per second, per cell. It boggles the mind.
Yeah, we are, again, a miracle. I find the human body, I find actually nature, everything in nature and in creation, as the wonderful Einstein says, you know, you can view life as everything is a miracle, or you can view life as nothing is a miracle. And I certainly prefer to view everything as a miracle. So thank you for taking us into the cell and the complexity of the cell. Can you talk a little bit about DHEA, though, as an overall overarching hormone in the body, and what it does, what benefits it brings to the body?
Well, these are part of the good feel-good hormones that basically help bring us into balance and make us happy. And of course, you can add into that, you know, the dopamines and the serotonins, like all of these, and the connection between the gut and the brain. And they're absolutely critical to be being made by the body. And I guess, you know, a lot of people will go out and buy these different supplements and stuff to make this, but what they need to really understand is your body is doing everything to try and get back to balance. And if you start at the beginning of the chain, and this is where modern medicine has let everyone down, rather than block and impede things with different drugs and even supplements, certain supplements can do that. So they give you a false sense of security sometimes, or you become dependent on them. If you go all the way back to square one, then these all start from the lipids. And isn't it a tragedy that Ansel Keys in the 1950s basically went out there as head of the American Medical Board, did a study called the Rottinger study or whatever, but he basically selected data from those different countries, and modern heart medicine and everything was based on this. So he selectively left out the ones that didn't fit his hypothesis, and basically we started on the route of all fats are bad and cholesterol is bad. And he was only opposed by one group of scientists, a Dr. Hugh Sinclair, who was the mentor of David Horowitz. So what happened is we took a turn and we basically decided that no fat, low fat, and fat is a bad thing.
So we demonized fat.
We did. And it wasn't the enemy from nature, it's the savior.
Right. And now
now we're ketogenesis, right? Now the trend is ketogenesis. So we are waking up, but it only took 70 years.
Yeah, well, like they did, when you go back to the cholesterol studies, though, when folks were talking about how you shouldn't be eating eggs because it's the clay.
Oh, ridiculous.
That what we people need to remember is that was funded by the cereal companies. They want you eating natural foods. They wanted you eating their box stuff, and if you eat anything that's in a box and can last for a few years,
just as a sidelight, so you can laugh, I've been eating about 4 eggs a day for 30 years. Maybe that's why my wife says I'm too round. I don't know. But I used to go in, with the doctors sometimes, this and that, not very often. But of course, the first thing you'd get from every one of them, oh, your cholesterol's too high. You need to be on. I mean, I must have had that for 50 times. And of course, I knew it was just a matter of time till the studies. And now, of course, the studies come out. And, we've gone from, your total cholesterol measurement, which means nothing, to, there's 2 kinds of cholesterol, means nothing. There's 2 kinds of good and bad cholesterol. Well, really, does that mean something? So all of the tests right now still don't mean a darn thing. The bottom line is as you get older, you should have more cholesterol. So mine is sky high and I'm living good.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's as I say, we've had, well, it would be from the early 1900s when we used to have a lot of natural herbal remedies. And then it was a certain family, I believe it was the Rockefeller family, that introduced the petroleum-based chemical medicines. And I guess now we have, as I say, the dis-ease, which reminds me of 90%. 90% of people visit their doctor because it's stress related. Stress related. So what can people do to reduce the stress in their body? Is surround themselves with as much beauty as possible. Let the small stuff go. Don't sweat the small stuff. You can listen to beautiful sound healing music and experience more of those emotions that make you feel good, because we are not victims of our biology. We are, in fact, creators, because that would be why there are people like Dr. Joe Dispenza, who was able to heal his own spine through meditation and other natural practices, natural remedies. That would be like Anita Moorjani in her book, Dying to Be Me, when she was in stage 5 cancer with tumors the size of grapefruits, 85 pounds. And the doctors were telling her, well, not telling her, but letting her family know it's time, because her organs were shutting down. And then had an NDE experience where she came to realize that it was fear, her fear of everything, fear of being herself, fear of getting something wrong. That mindset, that outlook can absolutely impair the body's ability to be healthy. So it's quite amazing.
And it's very important that people understand that, you know, taking the good fats, getting off the bad fats, eating properly from nature is only part of the equation. If you go to my website, Natural Cancer Recovery, then you'll see, you know, we have meditation, we have Qigong, we have all these things that people need to do. They have to have a why to want to live. And you bring up, you know, people who return from the dead. I mean, I have, and I was talking to her last night, she called me about another friend she's helping, but I had a lady come to me when I spoke at the Oakville Library in the early 2000s. There was about 200 there, and the fire marshals got on our back because they had to turn some people away. But there was a lady in the front row, about 85 pounds, bald, and she was in palliative radiation for cancer that has spread to 4 organs and everything else. And she's still alive today. And this is 17 years later. She had already made funeral arrangements. And so there's a number of these people that are testimonials on the website that people can go and actually call them up and have talks with them, because people need to be inspired that they can return to health. They need to be inspired that they can do things.
It's the belief, right? The power of belief.
Yeah.
And, I'll make sure I have Dr. Bruce Lipton has a fantastic book called The Biology of Belief.
Yeah.
Fortunate enough to read that many years ago.
And there's a whole list of books on our the website that was set up. I don't get involved very much other than throwing them some of the testimonials, or tell people to go there that's in their own words, including children that we've saved. But, you know, what people need to do is they've got to search through a lot of information. They can then, and we don't make any money off the website any which way. What it does, though, it points out books, it points out podcasts, it points out different people, this and that. And so it's a catch-all for people, not just with cancer, but you'll see dozens of other disorders and diseases and syndromes and so forth. But all of it comes down to, number one, you have to restore your cell membrane, because that's where the rubber hits the road. That's where the individual unit of life hooks up with the environment, which is your bloodstream.
Right. So in the stress resilience course I created, I state unequivocally, it's all about what you eat, what you think, what you drink, and how you move.
Absolutely.
So if you take the action to support the body, using food as medicine, supplementing appropriately to get that oxygen into the cells, drink drinking fantastic water. I point people to Dr. Masaru Emoto, who did research on consciousness and how you can send intentions to water. Water is conscious. It has its own, it's a building block of life. It has consciousness. And if you send intentions to the water, I hate you, it looks like a pool of toxic swamp water. Whereas if you send an intention to the water that you're drinking, thank you, I love you, I'm so grateful. You can see with he had a super fast camera and then took a freeze frame basically of the water that had crystallized, and the water that was given positive intention had a beautiful crystalline hexagon shapes. So when we think about our body being over 70-80% water, based on your mindset, your perception, your outlook, the way that you think and you feel, if you're negative outlook versus positive, you are either swimming in a toxic pool of water or a beautiful pool of sacred geometry, sacred crystalline structures. So that's what you eat, what you think, what you drink, and how you move. It's important to move. The body needs to move energy when it metabolizes food in the cells. It moves energy. So for those of you that hate running, don't run, walk, do snowshoeing, do anything that inspires you, dancing, like you said, Qigong, it could be martial arts, it could be anything that you love and that lifts your spirits. Because that's, like you say, the most important thing is, do you believe you can get healthy?
Yes.
Because belief and perception is exactly what becomes your reality.
And that brings us to the end of our time. Thank you so much, Paul, for joining me today. For more information on Paul Beatty, please do visit his website, naturalcancerrecovery.com, and you can visit elevatemehub.com for information on the stress resilience program that I offer my clients. Thank you so much for listening. Stay in your glorious heart. Breathe deeply and surround yourself with as much beauty and joy that you can. Until next time, God bless.